What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I have yet another collection update for you. And surprisingly, this one will actually be shorter, as I only have 11 CDs to go over this time. This kind of just rounds out everything that I've needed to catch up on, and well, yeah, I finally caught up. So more than likely, this will be the last one I do before we get into year-end lists. And, you know, we still have a few more reviews we're going to do probably the first couple of weeks of December, and then we'll get into year-end lists. So there's still more to come and more to assess as to what could possibly be on our year-end lists. So we have some new releases in here. We have some stuff from the Metalhead box. We have some stuff I picked up at live shows, and we even have one that was actually sent to me, courtesy of one of the bands that actually they've sent me stuff in the past, and it was really cool to hear from them again and have them send me another album to check out. So yeah, not as much stuff to go over, but still a pretty fair amount of stuff, and we're just going to get right into it. Tailgunner, Guns for Hire. This is the debut full length from this English heavy metal / speed metal act. I had never actually heard of them before. This was technically a blind buy. I didn't even hear of the label Fireflash before, but looked at the cover, decided it could be a lot of fun, and honestly, it was. I'm not sure if this band took its name from one of the better songs on No Prayer for the Dying, but man, there's a lot of Iron Maiden love on here. The opening track is interesting, as it is probably one of the slower tracks on there. It's a little bit more mid-tempo. It kind of kicks off like a, you know, just a good anthemic track from like an old Judas Priest album. But when you get into the bulk of this, it starts getting notably more thrashy and a little bit more aggressive. The vocals on here I think are really good. He's got a good gruff singing delivery, but man, it's the riffs. The riffs on here just absolutely sing. Most of these songs have just big galloping rhythms to it, like Future's Lost, Warhead, let's see, Revolution Scream, very anthemic, huge chorus on it. Everything is very riffy, very anthemic, very empowering, and honestly the whole album flows really well. The only knock I could really make on it is mostly due to the production, and I think that's just because the vocals just sound a tad bit muffled, even the backup vocals. And generally with like classic heavy metal, you want a singer that's going to carry over, and he does sound like he would if it was mixed a little bit differently. Like a lot of this kind of reminds me of like the first two Enforcer albums, and of course a lot of classic stuff, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. I'd even throw in Satan in there too. There's some interesting quirky riffs on there that kind of just screams that band. And I absolutely love the closer on here. Rebirth is a just 9-minute riff farm. I think it's about 9 minutes. It's definitely the longest track on there, and it is just non-stop harmonies, soaring leads. It's just a killer song. I will say it does get a little formulaic. The opening track kind of sets more of a mid-tempo pace, and then the bulk of this album is just very fast and thrashy. There are some more aggressive songs that border more on thrash metal, like Crash Dive, but a lot of it just kind of hangs in one particular gear for the most part. I don't think that hurts the album very much, though. I just think maybe some of the tracks could be rearranged, but overall, this is just a fun banger. Like, this is 100% a giant throwback, and I definitely want to check out more by this band because, you know, they got the riffs, they got the melodies, solid vocals. Like, this kind of checks off everything you'd want from like classic retro heavy metal / speed metal. So yeah, if you like bands like Night Demon, again, early Enforcer, like namely those first two albums, and of course like all the classics, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, etc., definitely check this out. This was a solid listen. Organ Dealer, The Weight of Being. This is the second album from this New Jersey-based grindcore act. I heard a couple of tracks on Everlasting Spew's YouTube channel, and I decided to pick it up when the CD actually made it to this side of the pond, because, again, like, shipping all the way from Italy is pretty expensive. I'm a giant grindcore freak in general. I like the sound of this overall. It had a very, like, Pig Destroyer, Nawesome sort of sound, and then I saw it had guest spots from members of Exhumed, Birdflesh, Sunrot, and Noisome, and it was 21 tracks in 23 minutes. This sounds like a giant grindcore party to me, and this album flat out whoops ass. This is just vicious from start to finish. Blast beats, two steps, some solid breakdowns, and it's very riffy too. Like, there's some good chuggy kind of like thrashy riffs mixed in there. It's high energy as hell. The vocals are ferocious on here, bordering on exhausting. Like, it sounds like he's breathing out his last gasps at the end of every song, and he's just about to collapse from the exhaustion. And I mean, that's kind of perfect for grindcore. The drum work is just mind-numbingly intense. Like, it is just crazy blast beats wicked fills. This whole album is vicious and just a non-stop attack. Like, this is like a no breaks run on like the sketchiest roller coaster you've ever seen. I do like how they kind of mix it up a little bit, like, you know, bringing in some, you know, again, like thrashier riffs, especially on Daily Existence. And there's an actual lead on Endless Despondence, which, you know, leads are generally not a thing that happen very often in grindcore. Not that there isn't room for them in a 1.5-minute long song, it's just something that rarely ever happens. And actually all the songs in here are very short and violent. I think there might be one or two that are a little bit over the 2-minute mark, but to make up for that, because that's just entirely too long-winded for a grindcore song, you have some songs that are under 10 seconds, like Ignite Everything and Catastrophic Misadventure. That sounds like the working title for the Goonies if they all died in the end. Anyway, this is flat out vicious. This is just kind of everything I love about grindcore. And I mean, I'll be honest, like, it's got a chance to go on my list as well too, because there wasn't a second on here that I didn't like. Everything is just on point. The production is excellent. It's mixed very well, but it is still just grimy and gritty as hell. It's just, you know, musical violence, and that's exactly what I look for in grindcore. So yeah, if you're a big fan of like Pig Destroyer, Nausum, Discordance Axis, Rotten Sound, just grindcore. Grindcore in general, if you like grindcore, I'm reasonably sure you will dig this, so check it out. Green Lung, This Heathen Land. This is the third album by this UK doom metal act, occult rock, I don't know, like heavy metal. This is actually my first time ever listening to them. I know that they've had like a lot of hype here recently. I know like Banger TV covered this, and I heard a lot of people rumbling about it. So I ended up picking up because I was just kind of curious about it. And this is pretty interesting. Like, it's definitely doom metal, but it's got like a lot of like, I don't know, how would I say, like 80s rock kind of hooks. I'll be honest, some of this sounds like Ghost. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here I feel is very comparable to Ghost, but Ghost earlier on in their career, like kind of cutting it off around Meliora. Like, honestly, if they had not gone for the more glitzy sound that have been on the last two albums and kind of just kept going down a doomier path, this might be what they sounded like. You have big, doom-laden, thick guitars. There's organs in the background to create this very spooky, occult atmosphere. And then when you hear the vocals, honestly, you could have told me that was Tobias Forge, and I probably would have believed it because the vocals are actually very similar to Ghost. But musically, this definitely takes more cues from bands like Cathedral, Black Sabbath, Candlemass. Like, it is more straightforward doom metal, except they're big on like kind of hooky songs. Like, they want big choruses, and a lot of these songs have really excellent choruses. So, I mean, they're pretty good at it. Songs like Hunters in the Sky and Oceans of Time, both, while they do have like good doom-laden riffs, have big choruses. Hell, even Oceans of Time has choirs in the background, which is very Ghost. But again, this still embraces more doom metal on here. Like, there's some really heavy songs in here that are a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of Ghost at this point. Like, One for Sorrow is a flat-out heavy song. Like, the riff on it that carries it is just downtrodden, it's murky, it's heavy. The breakdown on it is even heavier, and that is just something you don't really find in Ghost right now. This, again, kind of harks back to like earlier doom metal in the 80s, I would say. And the production here, I think, is fantastic. Like, everything sounds very big, very lush. It still has like an organic sound. It doesn't sound too overproduced. There's good atmospheric touches, again, with the keyboards having that kind of like occult sort of vibe to them. Like, they kind of have like more of a Hammond organ sort of sound. And then Song of the Stones has like really good acoustic passages and tribal drums and kind of like chanted vocals. So this kind of has like an almost like 70s horror movie sort of vibe, like more of a thriller. Like, it's not a super gory one, but it's more about the suspense and such. Hell, maybe like 60s, I guess. I don't know. Like, it has an interesting vibe overall. It has like darker, more occult themes, but it's very catchy at the same time. And once again, I kind of feel like I'm describing Ghost, but I'm not, because this band is slightly different, but very comparable. Now, I actually like Ghost, and I like, you know, old school doom metal. So all of this actually really appealed to me, and I think this is a pretty solid album. It does get like a little campy and a little cheesy at times, and sometimes the big vocal hook doesn't necessarily land. But overall, this was just kind of fun to listen to. It's got solid riffs, good breakdowns, it's catchy. you know, just sort of a fun release. So yeah, if you're a big fan of, again, I would say like Cathedral, Black Sabbath, Candlemass, maybe a little bit of the Sword, and definitely Ghost, like earlier Ghost for damn sure, check this out. This is actually pretty damn good. Insomnium, Songs of the Dusk. This is the 4th EP from these Finnish melodic death masters at this point. Honestly, I think they're one of the most consistent mellow death bands out there. We reviewed their last album this year, Anno 1696. I think I got those numbers right. Anyway, we reviewed it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty solid offering. And this, I believe, are just extra tracks that were done during those sessions, and they were on the special edition, but we didn't go over the special edition. We went over the regular edition. But they packaged them as their own EP later, and honestly, I kind of like this maybe a little bit more than Anno 1696. Now, that is not a dig against the full length. I just think these 3 songs really stand out from one another, and they are unbelievably catchy. Like, these guys are great at writing super sad, dreary songs. Absolutely excellent at it. Like, if you want to get completely bummed out, but you also want some, like, good heavy riffs, well, I mean, there's a lot of bands I could recommend, but Insomnium would definitely be one of them. But these 3 songs represent a good variety of all the cool things that they do in their sound. The opening track, Flowers of the Night, is very soft and very somber and melancholy. Like, it's very lush sounding, and it gets heavier as it goes on. I think the melodies in that song are just unbelievably catchy. Like, they just have a solid hook, and they maintain harsh vocals throughout. They kind of muffle them to like a low roar during the verses, but they get bigger. It's very anthemic towards the chorus. And then Stained in Red is heavy. Like, there's like some awesome heavy chugging on there, like more machine gun guitars. It has more just kind of urgency to it. It's a little bit more ferocious. There's some solid breakdowns on there, but also like good lush synths. Like, so you get this good balance of like their heavier material and like some of their more melodic material. And then the closing title track is just absolutely amazing. It has clean vocals on it. The harmonies are absolutely beautiful. It's anthemically sad, so it's everyone kind of joining together and just having a good cry or something. I don't know, it's just very catchy and very fitting for like the colder weather coming in, the gray skies. Like, yeah, these guys definitely fit that vibe so well. And yeah, this whole EP is absolutely awesome. And again, I kind of like it just a little bit more than the full length. Like, the full length I thought was solid, but at times it did feel a little bit bloated. This is 3 tracks. It's still over 20 minutes. All the songs are relatively long, but I think the fact that they all stand out from one another and are all just killer. In fact, there's some songs on the full length that I would trade out for these songs because I think they're that good. But yeah, this just kind of sticks with me a little bit more than the full length overall. Like, there's just something about these 3 songs where all of them stand out really well for different reasons, and they all just showcase how awesome Insomnium is in terms of their songwriting. Yeah, this kind of caught me off guard because generally when you hear that, you know, these songs are like kind of leftovers or they're only available in a special edition, you think these are the cast-offs. And honestly, I think these 3 songs are just flat out amazing. So yeah, I really dig this. And I mean, pretty much if you're a long-time Insomnium fan, you'll probably love this, but also like Paradise Lost, Dark Tranquility. I would even say definitely some Amorphous too. If you just like melancholy but heavy music, definitely check this out. This is an absolutely killer EP. Necrophagia, Season of the Dead. This is the 1987 debut from this legendary Ohio death metal act. One of the earliest death metal acts, along with like Death and Possessed, pretty much helping shape the sound of death metal in general. Now, this is the 2022 reissue from Hell's Headbangers. I only own some of the later Necrophagia albums, namely Death Trip 69 and White Worm Cathedral, both of which I really enjoy, but it's been long overdue that I got some of the earlier stuff, and I saw this at my local record shop. I was like, you know what, let's just do it, let's get it. I heard some of this stuff over the years. I already knew what it was going to sound like, and yeah, like this is early kind of like proto death metal. It still has a lot of thrash to it. I gotta say, the opening track, Season of the Dead / Forbidden Pleasure. Season of the Dead is probably the intro part, which is a very long, drawn-out acoustic section, which, man, at a certain point, I was just like, get on with it, because it's over 2 minutes of this kind of repetitive acoustic melody, and then it gets into the thrashiness. But while it has like a thrashy energy, like the riffs are more sinister, There are definitely a lot more like, you know, darker tremolos on it. So it is definitely death metal. It's just sort of played with a thrashy energy, which, I mean, here in the States, our death metal definitely came from thrash. It's very fast-paced for the most part, but there's good solid groovy sections, especially on Insane for Blood. I love that breakdown there. It's just got a good solid groove to it. And there's a lot of fun, like, spooky characteristics to their music. Like, these guys are definite horror fans. I don't think I need to tell you that. But the song Ancient Slumber has the Night on Bald Mountain intro, which, I mean, if you're familiar with Fantasia, it's the whole demon on the mountain and all the spirits and shit. It's like one of the best animated segments I think Disney ever did. The song Abomination has this cool, like, percussive bass in the background, and it kind of gets into some like gnarly old school Slayer riffs to kind of set the mood. And Terminal Vision and Painful Discharge definitely have like a lot of cool sinister melodies that really stood out to me. Especially Terminal Vision gets almost doomy at the end, like the riffs slow down, it kind of gets murky and sludgy. Yeah, this whole album was pretty damn awesome. Except for, you know, the outro, Season of the Dead, which they kind of bookend the intro and outro, and I just feel like that's just a little bit extra at that point. But overall, like the songs that are actual songs and not just intros and outros, because, I mean, the outro is mostly just Halloween noises. Everything else, though, really solid, early, nasty death metal with a thrash metal bite. Again, I already knew I liked this band, and this is just me kind of starting to pick up the rest of their stuff. So I've definitely got a few more albums I gotta get before I kind of round out the Necrophagia collection. But yeah, I dig this. So yeah, if you're a big fan of Possessed, Slayer, Death, you know, all that early death metal and kind of like, you know, gnarlier thrash metal, definitely check this out if you haven't. And if you have already checked this out, then you already know this is good. But I don't know, listen to it again. Why not? Because it's good. Hanging Fortress, Suspended in Torment. This is the second album from this Toledo, Ohio-based death metal act slash, I guess, kind of brutal death metal act. Now, this was a cool surprise in the Metalhead box, considering this band is from my hometown. I actually went over their first album, Darkness Devours, in a collection update a while ago, and this actually has some new members on it. We have a new vocalist, Ian Rader, and new second guitarist, Kyle Boyack, and it really hasn't changed their sound very much. This is just flat out groove-laden, chuggy, heavier than hell. Definitely has a bit of that caveman death metal aesthetic where it is just primal, down to its core elements of just chuggy riffs, syncopated grooves, blast beats, deep guttural vocals. Like, this is a no knuckles left undragged sort of listen across its entire like half-hour runtime. Very similar to bands like Sanguisugabog, 200 Stab Wounds, I would even say Tribal Gaze, where it is just a lot of primal palm-muted chugs. Again, groove-laden as hell. Every song is out to just bash you over the skull with, like, I don't know, a human femur. You get massive slam breakdowns in songs like Scalped Amongst the Worms, Strewn Across the Altar, but it occasionally leaves the outright just brutality in favor of some old school death metal charm. Like, Starved and Carved has a really good, like, kind of old school vibe to it in terms of, like, the riffs being a little bit more just old school death metal. And the tremolo riffs on Hate Burns Eternal are particularly catchy. There's some good harmonized riffs on there too. But the real thing that kind of surprised me was the fact that the title track is actually an interlude. It's kind of this moody piece of clean guitars, and there's like trains in the background. And me being from the same city as these guys, it just kind of reminded me of every train I've ever been stuck behind here in this town. But the rest of it reminds me of just how badass of a band this band is live. Like, they flat out crush live. If you live in the tri-state area, I'm reasonably sure they've, you know, kind of ventured out past Toledo, but I've only seen them here in Toledo, and yeah, I will continue to see him here in Toledo. The only thing I can really knock this on is maybe like the cymbals sound a little bit too hissy in spots, and it does kind of have a similar vibe from track to track. Outside of the title track being like a moody sort of interlude slash instrumental, the rest of it kind of sticks to its guns and just lays on the brutality. That isn't necessarily a huge problem though, because this is a shorter album and you want to keep the intensity pretty much dimed for the entire time, and they definitely do that. So yeah, if you're a fan of, again, like 200 Stab Wounds, Tribal Gaze, Sanguisugabog, I'd even throw in Gate Creeper in there a little bit too. Check this out. This is just some nasty primal heaviness from my hometown, and they're doing a pretty damn good job representing us, so check it out. Stargazer, Emerging to the Boundless. This is the third album from this Australian avant-garde black and death metal act. This is yet another one that I got in the Metalhead box, and I heard a lot of cool things about this band. I also heard that they did a split with Argus Lent, which doesn't sit very well with me because while that band is definitely talented, they're definitely a bunch of racist dickholes, and I'm not on board with that at all. Anyway, this band features current and former members of Mournful Congregation, Cauldron Black Ram, and Intellect Devourer, all bands I am familiar with, all bands that I really enjoy, and man, this album is absolutely nuts. This is technical and strange, the transitions are wild, there's a lot of just intricate playing and wild vocals, and just this whole album's just nuts, but nuts in a really cool way. There's a lot of stuff in here that reminds me of bands like Atheist, Coroner, The Chasm too. Like there's a lot of like intricate thrashy riffs. There's fretless bass work, or at least I believe it's fretless, and vocals that seem to change like from every song. Like sometimes you get low death roars, sometimes you'll get shrieks, sometimes you get these weird bellows, but they work really well because they shift along with this very strange music where the transitions can just be just on a dime, like just into like some weird techie flourishes to like some proggy stuff to flat out heavy doomy sections. This album is all over the place, and well, every place that they go, they do it really well. There's lots of distant melodies and just like strange turns to the music, like the song "And Earth Rides Its Endless Carousel." That opens up with like this really cool jazz fusion section with clean guitars, and the bass lines on, well, this entire album, but that particular song just sort of slither through the song. It's actually really melodic, and there's a lot of melody on here, like pockmarked in between all the dizzying transitions and just absolutely outlandish songwriting dynamics on here. Songs like Old T and The Grand Equalizer have like cleaner vocals. The Grand Equalizer has more of a chanted vibe, but that song is just nuts in terms of like its really insane approach to songwriting. Like it just goes from, you know, nuts technical flourishes to like just flat out catchy riffs, like just straightforward kind of no nonsense riffing, and then back to the strange weirdness that this album just seems to excel at. Now, I was actually surprised that this album runs under 40 minutes. Generally, you know, more progressive or avant-garde albums tend to run a bit long because of the perpetual noodling and just trying to find something that doesn't necessarily fit and then sort of like make it fit in its own weird way. Not saying it doesn't do that, but the fact that it is like around 38 minutes is actually kind of shocking, because you are greeted to an absolute ton of music on here. And it feels like it runs maybe a little bit longer, but kind of in a good way, where you kind of get lost in all of the wild songs and you're like, oh wow, only 5 minutes has gone by. Yeah, this whole album is absolutely nuts, and I've been hearing about this band for years in terms of like people bring them up in the comments, like, oh, you got to check this one out. Like, I know you guys bring up a lot of like Australian bands. This is one to definitely check out. And yeah, I can see why. This is just kind of crazy sounding, and crazy sounding in kind of like a classic way. Again, like the comparisons are a little bit older. Like there's stuff on here that reminds me a lot of like Pestilence's Spheres, which is just a nuts album too. But this is really good. Like, I don't know if I would call it full-on avant-garde, because it doesn't get so strange where it kind of just, I don't know, goes a little bit off the rails. It's kind of my issue with a lot of avant-garde stuff. But yeah, like this actually comes together really well. And it's kind of hard not to be impressed by the songwriting and the musicianship on here. Like, it's just kind of like some next level weirdness. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I definitely want to find more by this band. This is just a nuts listen. Again, if you're a fan of The Chasm, again, Pestilence, Spheres, maybe a little bit of Cynic too, Coroner, Atheist, generally stuff like that. Yeah, this album's flat out bonkers, but I really dig it. This is just really cool stuff, so check it out. Stabbing, Extirpated Mortal Process. This is the debut full-length from this Texas brutal death metal act. I just recently saw them on their tour with Incantation, Suffocation, and Skeletal Remains, and I was impressed, so I had to pick up their album. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about this band. We were supposed to see them at Full Terror Assault, but they couldn't make it for whatever reason. But I know this band has made some headlines here recently, and I know why, because I was at one of the shows. Their frontwoman, Bridget Lynch, filled in for Ricky in Suffocation because he was suffering from what I believe was like an upper respiratory infection, like nasty cough, lost his voice. he had to like tap out in some shows before the date we saw him in Detroit, just because like his voice was completely roached. And he even stayed quiet that entire date that we were there just to see if he could save his voice, and it just wasn't happening. So Bridget stepped in on vocals for at least the classic Suffocation tracks, and she absolutely killed it. Like, she honestly kind of sounded like Frank a bit. Like, she has amazing low, deep roars. They are just absolutely sick. And I saw that a lot of the metal publications like Metal Injection, Metal Sucks were covering it, and I was like, yeah, no, I saw her do it, and she absolutely crushed it. And I already dug Stabbing's performance before that, and just seeing that was just kind of an added bonus. But yeah, I snagged their album, and this is just flat out gross, insanely heavy, brutal death metal. Good balance of groove and blast beats. It is heavier than hell, like guitar driven, lots of groove, lots of slams. Like, this is just kind of just constantly slamming. And man, Bridget's vocals are absolutely terrifying. Like, they are disgustingly low, pretty much in the vein of bands like Disgorge, Dying Fetus, Deeds of Flesh. It's very old school brutality. And it's also pretty much a no breaks run. In fact, this album runs like a tank mowing through a bunch of suburban homes. There isn't a second on this album that isn't just absolutely punishing. And a lot of it kind of does it in the same way. Like, it is very much a meat and potato style, you know, brutal death metal. Get down to that slam, get down to a blast beat section, make sure the vocals are sick. That's pretty much every track. There are some interesting nuances, like the eponymous track, Stabbing, has what I would almost call like a Where the Slime Live riff. Like, it gets a little bit more towards like, you know, like Morbid Angel style death metal. Kind of trims off a layer of brutality in favor of some like atmosphere and like some more like sinister melodies. Visceral Liquid Terror is probably a standout because it slows it down. Like, it kind of takes, you know, the halftime approach right out of the gate instead of like kind of sticking with that main kind of 4/4 time chugging groove. Absolutely disgusting main riff on there, but I'll be honest, all the riffs in here are pretty damn disgusting. Like, this album could give you like a near permanent case of stank face. Like, it might need to be surgically corrected. Like, that's how much stank is on this album. But overall, like, I dig it. I do think, again, it's a little bit one note, but it is their first album, and they were definitely going for the throat on every song. Like, they wanted to make sure that this was absolutely savage, and believe me, it is. And this band has already gone through some lineup changes. I believe they had 2 new members on this tour, and honestly, they sound great live. So who knows, their sound may change like a little bit going into the next one, but I will definitely say it's going to be heavier than hell. But yeah, so far, I dig this. This is pretty solid. It's, again, very meat potatoes, straight to the point, brutal as hell. But if that is what you're looking for, and again, you love old school brutal death metal, just like a little bit of like kind of hardcore groove to it, check this out. Definitely for fans of like Suffocation, Disgorge, Deeds of Flesh, like that old school brutal death metal sound. It's definitely a huge part of this. If you're a big fan of that, I'm reasonably sure you'll dig this, so check it out. Carnal Tomb, Embalmed in Decay. This is the 3rd full-length from this German death metal act. We actually reviewed their last album, Abhorrent Veneration, years ago. Actually, it was back when the Tommy was with us. He actually sat down and reviewed that one with me, and it was a pretty solid album. I got Rotten Remains not too long after that, their debut album, and that is an absolutely sick album. And yeah, this is another badass death metal album that came out in 2023. Imagine my surprise. This is just some gross old school death metal, kind of in between like just like, you know, like US old school death metal, like Autopsy and Death, but also a little bit of like Entombed and, you know, Dismember in there too, because the guitar tone is kind of an HM2 buzzsaw tone. I don't know, it's very heavy, very thick. It kind of straddles both scenes a little bit, but man, like, this is just riffy and disgusting. There's lots of great atmosphere on it. And one of the things that really stood out to me on this one is the lead work on here. I feel like there are constant lead harmonies that are just creepy and kind of slither through every song and kind of morph into solos later on. And I absolutely love it. Like, it really sets the mood. Like, every big bottom heavy tremolo in here gets a little bit more sinister with all the harmonies they pepper in. And this has also got a lot of prominent bass work. It isn't necessarily like flashy or proggy or anything like that. Like, it does have its more technical moments, but I like the fact that it is, you know, very prominent and heavy in terms of like just adding to the overall grit of this album. Because while I think this is really mixed well in terms of like that death metal sound, it's got a lot of grit on it, and it sounds swampy and murky. It sounds like it was pretty much recorded in whatever room that this album cover is depicting. Like, this looks like a very unpleasant room, both in terms of like sight and smell, which is a perfect room to record a death metal album in my opinion. And they definitely keep that with the atmospheric touches on here. Again, the melodies, there's some horror synths on Morgue Usurper. Defiled Flesh has some great tremolo harmonies that are just gross and haunting. And then you get some stuff that I didn't necessarily expect, like Cataclysmic Maze opens up with kind of a proggy start. Like, it's clean guitars, there's really cool bass playing, like there's some off-time drums. Completely different mood than I would say anything else on here, and then that gives way to almost blackened tremolo harmonies on there. So the songwriting here gets kind of inventive and a little bit outside of the box every now and then, but for the most part they stick to a very tried and true 90s death metal style, and they absolutely nail it. Like, every song in here crushes. Even the intro, granted, like, it's a long piano intro, but it does build into like the overall swampy, disgusting sound that you'll get into later on the album. It does its job in terms of like setting it up. It works with the atmosphere well, and it is actually musical, so my bitching about an intro here is pretty minimal. So pretty much if you like your death metal very grimy and filthy, like Autopsy, Death, definitely like Entombed and Dismember in there too. Throw in some Incantation as well, because it does get kind of doomy in sections. But yeah, this is just another awesome death metal album. It came out in 2023, and again, this just seems to be like quite a year for death metal in general, which is, again, like kind of a pain in the ass when it comes down to making year-end lists. Yeah, not really a huge complaint. But yeah, if you love old school, filthy death metal, definitely check this out. This is another nasty release. Eternal Evil, The Gates Beyond Mortality. This is the second album from this Swedish blackened thrash metal act. I actually went over their debut album, The Warrior's Awakening Brings the Unholy Slaughter. I think that's the name of it. It's a really long album title. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. It's just tight, vicious, blackened thrash. And this is kind of more of the same, though I think it's a little bit less blackened and a little bit more focused on the thrash metal. Not necessarily a huge complaint. I think the black metal is still here. Occasionally has bits of atmosphere with like some colder tremolos, but a lot of this is just high octane, fast thrash riffing, and yeah, this album's awesome. You get some big 80s vibes at the opening intro, Depths of a New Eternity. There's some pulsating synths in the background. It kind of sets up the atmosphere, and then bam, it just explodes into just nasty, high octane thrash riffs. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here that reminds me of like Hell Ripper. I would definitely say like Vulture as well, and maybe even like a little bit of Deceased, because it does get a little bit faster and more aggressive and kind of bordering on a death thrash sound occasionally. I really like the vocals. He's got a good thrash voice, like it's just a good steady roar, but he also peppers in like some more ghastly wails every now and then just to remind you that this is kind of blackened. You get some good throwbacks to like more like classic speed metal on Signs of Ancient Sin and Destruction of Light. There's a lot more harmonies and melodies on there, but this gets like flat out aggro as hell. Like Funeral Prayers is just a monster of a song. Actually kind of reminded me a lot of Sodom. And of course this band's got tons of riffs, because I mean, if you're a thrash band with no riffs, then I don't think you're a thrash band anymore. Like the song The Cursed Trilogy, that is some amazing syncopated gallops. There's great melodies to it. You get some slower sections like the title track where it kind of slows down the energy, but it knows how to ramp it right back up. And I like the way that this album is paced too. Like, a lot of these songs are very high octane, lots of galloping D beats in your face, but they do know how to slow it down every now and then. And they pepper in a lot of great melodies that are not only just like sinister and dark, but you get some like, you know, more epic ones every now and then too. Now again, I do think it has lost a little bit of the black metal in here. It's more or less a seasoning now rather than kind of being like a full-on blend. I definitely think there was more black metal to the first album, but that isn't, again, like a huge complaint, because this would totally work as just a flat-out thrash metal album. The black metal aspects kind of come out in like the tremolo riffing every now and then. Like, it gets a little bit colder and a little bit more harsh at times, but most of the time they're going for like those machine gun thrash riffs, and even the vocal approach doesn't necessarily have like a blackened sort of scream to it. Like, it feels, again, more straight up thrash and very like 80s thrash too. So if anything, I would just say this album is a little bit different than their debut. It's still really solid. It still packs all the riffs and all the energy. And it's still dark and creepy when it needs to be. It's just, you know, more like pissed off sounding than, you know, like sinister this time. So yeah, if you're a big fan of Hellripper, Deceased, I would say even Butcher too, and definitely some Sodom, definitely check this out. This is good thrashy fun. And finally, we have the Bleeding Monkrater. This is the third album from this UK death thrash act, and this was one that was sent to me by the band. In fact, this is not the first time I've gone over this band on this channel. I believe I got their first album, Rites of Absolution, in a Metalhead box. It could have been their second one, Morbid Prophecy. It was so long ago, I can't quite remember. But the band actually reached out and said, hey, would you mind doing a full like review for one of those albums you got in the Metalhead box? Again, I think it was the second one. Either way, I obliged them, did a full-on review. I really enjoyed it. It's just like vicious death thrash, and I love that shit. So they reached out once more, had a new album to let me check out and sent it to me, and I'll be honest, I think this is probably their best effort yet. They sent me a letter with this and like actually talked about how they got like the right producer on here. They wanted to get like their tightest, most aggressive sound yet, and I think they 100% did. And honestly, this is probably their heaviest album yet. Production was kind of an issue on some of the past ones. This one, I think the production sounds great. In fact, the guitars, they have definitely thickened up, and I think that pushes them a little bit more towards that death metal side now. They definitely still have their thrashy aggression on there. You know, lots of stuff in there that reminds me of like Legion of the Damned, Vader, and Deicide in terms of like blending thrash and death metal there. But with that added heft on the guitars, this sounds even more vicious. The vocals on here seem to have like even faster, more aggressive cadences. The drum work is just blasting almost at all times, but when they slow down to grooves, man, it hits hard. The breakdowns on the title track and Chainsaw Death Cult are absolutely amazing. There's a really cool bass lead section on Chainsaw Death Cult, and the riff work on that section I think is absolutely awesome. There's also a bit more in the way of blast beats on here, again kind of pushing it more towards death metal a bit more. The song Union of Horror makes good use of a kind of 1-2 punch between like a thrashy D beat and a flat out blast beat section. It kind of goes back and forth on there. It's a cool blend of two different types of aggression on that. And this is like foot on the gas aggression throughout here. Like, yeah, you get your groovy breaks, but everything about this is just brimming with hostility. And that's awesome because this is only about a half an hour long, and I don't want any filler on a half an hour listen. There's not an ounce of fat to trim off of this, and all of it is just savage, on point. It attacks you and just beats you over the head with riff after riff. And yeah, I dig the shit out of it, which is, again, problematic because I'm at year-end list time, and I'm gonna definitely jam this one more. But yeah, this is a fantastic release, and I will legit say this is probably the best thing they've done so far. So yeah, if you're a fan of, again, like Vader, Deicide, I would even throw in like Hate Sphere in there too. Just straight to the point, aggressive death thrash / thrashy death metal. Again, this one pushes a little bit more towards death metal overall. Check this out. Vicious listen from start to finish. That's exactly what I want out of a death thrash album. Check it out. And believe it or not, that does it. That is everything that I have not listened to in terms of stuff stacking up for collection updates. I am out of music for now, but don't worry, I'm definitely going to get more. It's just I think that'll probably take place after year-end lists. So yeah, now it's kind of getting down to that. We do have more reviews we are going to do, probably again to like the second week of December, and then it'll be on to our lists, which I am looking forward to and also kind of dreading because I've been toying with my list a lot, adding stuff, removing stuff. It's a giant pain in the ass, and especially this year because there's been so many quality releases. But we're looking forward to getting those out to you, and again, we have a whole bunch of other stuff we're working on. Again, Black Dahlia Murder is the next ranking up. We're also going to start doing some more retro reviews. What's John Jammin' is going to come back at some point too. So yeah, tons of content coming in the future. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below, thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel as well. But if you want to get some Thralls of Metal merch, go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, we have new ones, we have old ones at a discounted price, and we even have hats now. So if you're interested in any of that, click the link down below. And of course, thank you guys so much for all of your support. It is amazing to see this channel grow well beyond any expectations I ever had for it. And we're only going to keep moving forward with stuff because, I mean, I imagine next year is going to be loaded with stuff. And yeah, as long as there's metal, we'll have stuff to talk about. So once again, big thank you to all of you, and we will catch you later.